Ambitious but lazy young men. First of all, if you're feeling that way and you have these huge dreams and ambitions and goals, like stuff that you dream about at night that you can't wait to do one day and gets you excited and motivated, but you wake up the next morning and then you don't actually work towards those goals, or you just find yourself being really lazy. Not only can I relate to that, but I've also spoken to a lot of young men, hundreds, ages 18 to 25, that are in the exact same situation as you and I. So don't feel like you're alone in this. And the thing that I want to do for the most part is bring light to this topic, and just share my own story and share how I am overcoming it. And then ultimately, if that can benefit you, that would be great. But ultimately, you're gonna have to come to your own conclusion. So if this is the first video that you see from me, I sit down, I read the Bible, and I take lessons from here and how we can apply that to our own life as young men. A topic that I've been reading about and praying about a lot recently is working. Dreams, goals, ambitions, especially as a young man, and career and work, these are all popular topics. And it's kind of brushed over, in my opinion, where in a sense, it kind of just gets washed down to either go to college or go to trade school and then just work your job. And then somewhere along the way, you can become successful. Well, I've been studying a lot about this topic in general, and I want to hone in on the fact of, if you're somebody who has this big, ambitious personality, but you're also lazy and you can't seem to understand why, that's kind of what I've been going through. So this video is for you. Somewhere along the way, as a young man, you start to ask yourself the question of why not just willingly be lazy, willingly take the easy route in life. And you may have some friends, or you may have experienced this personally, but you'll come to realize that if you constantly choose and seek the easy path in life, you're actually going to end up miserable, you're going to end up depressed and living a much harder life than if you would have chosen the hard choices so that you can live an easy life. Basically, easy choices lead to a hard life, hard choices lead to an easy life. And maybe not easy life, so to speak, but definitely more purposeful, more meaningful, more fulfilled life, rather than unfulfilling, depressed, and kind of getting to a point where you feel worthless and directionless. So I feel like most of you probably already understand that concept. It's just you're at a standstill of actually choosing those hard choices. You know that it's what you should do, but you somehow, some reason, just you won't do it. And you're having a hard time doing that. And the reason that you understand that choosing those hard choices are worth it is because you've come to the conclusion that whatever is on the other side of those hard choices is worthwhile. It's worth going after in life. Basically, the outcome that you've set in your mind that's at the end of your goal is worthwhile. And Jordan Peterson said, a lot of the things that people regard as the traps in life are actually the means to their life. And I don't know if this is gonna apply to a whole lot of people, but this is how it's been in my life. I read that and first of all, I didn't really understand what he meant. And then I started to really think about what do I consider traps in my life. And it's kind of the idea of like thinking the negative way towards work, and about, the 9-to-5 rat race, the matrix, if you want to call it that. And I kind of wanted to break free from that lifestyle, because growing up, I kind of always saw everybody around me, my family, my parents, my friends' parents, like everybody was working so much, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and yet they were still miserable for some reason. There was still somehow never enough money to make their life actually enjoyable, I guess is the best way to put it. And they were just like chasing their tail every single week. And I started to ask myself the question, do I want to live that way? And I came to the conclusion of no. And for that reason, I started to view work as a very negative thing. And that gets very dangerous whenever you start thinking work is the problem and it's not the reason behind you work is the problem. So if you're just working constantly every single week, day in and day out, living for 5 p.m., living for the weekend, all in the back of your mind, hoping and looking forward to the one day that you get to retire, that's a longing way to live, in the sense of you're never actually going to be fulfilled if all the things that you want are constantly in the future. And I think it kind of makes us, it's like a psychological thing that we do to ourselves, is we, instead of making what we want something that can be achievable in the present, we push it off into a future, into a later date, because we have the fear of failure, and we're afraid of failing and then coming to the realization that we're never going to be able to get that thing. And that's why essentially we push it off into the future. And how that looked like for me was, my biggest fear was like this fear of failure, because I termed failure as this basically just working nonstop, never being fulfilled, never really having meaning behind what I do. And to be completely honest, that took me away from pursuing a job or a career all in itself. So that's why I've always been more business minded, trying to take the entrepreneurial route in life, and just trying to figure out, how can I pay the bills just by doing the minimum amount of work as possible, or without having to go get a job and work under a boss and hate my life, because I thought that was the only two options. And I really did think that my ideal lifestyle was just this idea of financial freedom, where I'm just sitting on my boat all day fishing, or sitting on a beach. Kind of the idea of like passive income that you get in your mind whenever people start talking about that online. And it's essentially just a life of leisure. And I kept asking myself the question, do I really want a life of leisure? And the more I kept reading the Bible about what it says about how to work, and that working is actually a gift from God, I realized, no, I don't want a life of leisure. I don't want to not work. I just want to make sure that my work has meaning and has a purpose and has fulfillment that comes with it, so that I can actually enjoy it no matter what I'm actually doing. And to be honest, I started doing a lot of things just with half of my ability, like holding a lot in reserve, if that makes sense, especially whenever it comes to work, because it's like I have these big dreams and goals, but I looked at work so negatively, it kind of made me feel like I didn't have to go all in on those goals, because of, in the back of my mind, subconsciously, I was protecting myself from the fear of failure, which is, if this doesn't work out, what I'm doing, I will have to go get a job and hate my life. And what I've learned in the Bible is that living that way, out of this fear of failure and protecting yourself by not going all in and living your life to the best of your ability, that's completely putting a limitation on God. And it's almost like a sacrifice to the gifts that God has given you, and a disrespect to God, because he gave you the gifts and he put a purpose on your life, and he gave you all this potential, so much that he sent his son to die for us. And yet you're gonna say, no, I'm not gonna try that hard. I'm just gonna go halfway, give 60%, not 100%. That way I can protect myself and be reserved if I fail. And that's the biggest thing that I'm learning right now, is don't put limitations on yourself and don't put limitations on God. If you really sit with it and you think about it, I'm pretty sure the devil would want you to only give, 50%, or make sure you have a little bit in reserve, so that way, you can constantly not live up to your greatest potential that God has called you for. And it's kind of like the devil is just playing us like puppets on a string. Like, we're thinking that we protect ourselves by not going all in, but like I said, we're really just limiting God and doubting ourselves, and it's a lot of negative emotion towards it, that I think the only way out is reading the scripture and learning what it says about work and the meaning behind it and the purpose for it, and basically giving your all, like it says in Colossians 3:23. It says, whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as working for the Lord, not for man. And I read that, and if you pick that verse apart and you say, with all of your heart, if you do something, you're not gonna leave a little bit in reserve so that you can say, oh, I didn't give it my all in case you fail. You're putting everything out there on the line. No matter what it takes, you're willing to do it because you're working unto the Lord and not for unto man. And I made a full sit-down, hour-long video about this. So if you're interested in that, I'll put that wherever I can in the description. But for the rest of this video, I wanted to give you something that's very practical on how to apply this, knowing that God calls us to do meaningful work with our life and that what we do is purposeful no matter what. So you need to leave behind this mindset of being afraid to fail, because we've established that it's limiting God and it's limiting yourself. Jordan Peterson said, instead of risking the possibility of failure, the things that you do in your life, the things that you partake in and engage in, essentially guarantee failure, which is that life of like the mediocre, half trying, leaving stuff in reserve for in case you fail. Like for example, you have these two different routes that you can take. This way is giving it your all, giving 110%, going all in, but you know that you're putting yourself out there, and if you fail, you know, you can say you gave it your all, but like there's still the possibility to fail. Or you can take this way, only give halfway. That way, in case you do fail, it's justifiable, and you're able to justify your actions of saying like, oh, well, if I would have tried harder, I could have done it. We don't like to live with the fact of, I gave it all that I had, and it still wasn't enough. That, I think, is where and I'm not educated enough to know all of these things, but I think that's kind of where it comes in, like the psychological aspect of like our subconscious minds, like protecting us from failure. And taking this path is literally the path of a mediocre, average life that is not a life of faith and putting your all into the world and like doing everything with all of your heart as it says to do in the Bible. And I wanted to read you this quote before I give you exact practical steps on moving forward, because I think it encapsulates the entire meaning of these two different paths that you can take in life. And it's the man in the arena. Theodore Roosevelt wrote The Man in the Arena, and it says, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit actually belongs to the man who is in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who continuously comes short again and again, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place will never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." And it kind of paints this picture of, literally imagine an arena where there's people, crowds, the entire perimeter of the arena. And all of these people are criticizing the one man actually giving it his all. The man inside the arena is gonna go all out. He's gonna leave it all out there, and he's not holding anything back, but he has the risk of failure. And you think about all the crowd, all these critics criticizing him, yet everybody in the crowd is not in the arena. They're not the ones leaving it all out there on the field. So they're the ones taking this path in life. They're living this life of mediocrity, and they're just gonna leave some left in the tank and not actually strive to go for those high goals because it's too risky, it's too scary. And then you have the man in the arena who's actually gonna give it all he has, who strives, who comes short again and again, because you cannot live a life where you're constantly giving 100% because you're going for these huge goals where you never fail. If you never have failures in your life, that just proves that you're not setting your goals high enough. I mean, you're not going all out and working unto the Lord, as it says in Colossians 3:23, because you're not giving your entire heart, working with your entire heart, and living life completely with fulfilling your potential in mind. And the quote basically says, he would rather take this route, be the man in the arena, giving it all he has, even if he fails, so that his place will never be with the cold and timid souls who took the such safe route in life, they neither know victory nor defeat. Yeah, you're gonna protect yourself and you're never gonna reach this, but if you never allow yourself to even take the risk, you're never going to know the victory, but you're also not going to know defeat. It's just going to be like this boring, mediocre life, and it's going to be depressing, at least to ambitious people like you and me. So if you come back to this guy, he would rather fail than be this guy. And it says, who in the end, you're taking this path. If you win, it's like you hit the jackpot, you hit the grand slam, bottom of the ninth. You win in all victory. You know the triumph of high achievement. And so I think I completely agree with that. I would rather be the guy who's striving for his goals, who puts his life out there, who lives a life of not taking the easy way out. How I can apply that to me. I mean, I saw everybody else around me going to college, getting good jobs, and collecting their paycheck. But I said, no, I would rather try to figure something out to where I can own my time, have freedom to spend the day with my family, like not constantly be tied up at work and not being able to make my kids' baseball practice because I got to work overtime this week for the third week in a row. No, I work for myself. I am my own boss. I don't have to go to somebody else and ask for time off like I'm begging them. I want to be able to be the one that makes that decision because of how hard I work, because I set the goals high, because of all, the things that come with that. And so you have these two options in life, whether you take that route of striving for everything that you could possibly be, or just protecting yourself and living a safe and, to be quite honest, boring life. So going forward, what can you do? First of all, you have to completely take away all things that are not your desire. Napoleon Hill talks about this in Think and Grow Rich. He talks about basically setting your goal and having this tunnel vision that's, if you truly want a lifestyle of freedom, do you also want the sports car, or is that just something that you want to boost your ego? Do you actually want the mansion, or is that just something that you think you should have because that's what successful people have? You have to be true and honest to yourself. For you, that might be the case. You may want those things. For me personally, could not care less of whether I drive a Chevy or a Ford or a Mercedes or a BMW. I don't care as long as it runs, because I would rather, I have my vision set on my goal, and my true goal, which is ultimate freedom, like I said, where I don't have to report to a boss, where I can not have to make my kids stress about bills because we never have enough at the end of the month, or having that freedom to where I'm never gonna miss a single practice or a single game. I'm always gonna be there. So whatever you determine that in your heart, that is truly your dream and your goal of this lifestyle that you wanna live, you set that and you strip away everything else that society says that you need to do to get there. And you think about being as realistic as you can with yourself, true to your own self. How can you get there? So you start at the end of your goal and you work backwards and you say, what do I have to do every single day to where if I do this every single day, I'm gonna eventually be there? And then you have to create a schedule. I am a huge schedule person, but somehow I never end up sticking to them. And it's because I constantly made it not having the right mindset while doing it. I thought I had to do hard things for 10 hours and then I can finally rest at the end of the day. Thought I had to do hard things that I didn't like for 5 days a week and then I can rest for 2. That just goes back to the lifestyle of constantly living for 5 p.m., constantly living for the weekend, constantly living for retirement, which is not how I believe God has called us to live our life. You have to determine for yourself, get yourself to understand and fully believe that whatever you're doing actually has meaning and purpose and value in this world. So whether you are a grocery store worker, putting cans on a shelf and twisting them for the labels to face out, you have to understand that everything that you do can glorify God if you do it with integrity, if you do it with hard work, if you do it with efficiency, and to the best of your ability, and with all of your heart because you're working unto the Lord. Also, just give yourself the practical outcome that the world is a better place by you doing whatever you're doing. So if you have a service-based business that, let's say, helps small YouTubers like myself grow their channel and make better videos, you have to break that down. Why are you helping YouTubers to grow their channel? Because you want to help them achieve their dream lifestyle and their dream career. Why are you wanting to help them do that because it gives you purpose in life. It reminds you that you're constantly helping others. So if you can break it down to, I'm doing this to glorify God and I'm doing it to help others and be something more of myself, that is enough to give yourself purpose to do every single task every single day. So you set up your schedule of whatever you actually need to do to get it done, but you have that mindset of every single thing that you do matters, whether anyone sees it or not, whether anyone even benefits from it or not, because at the end of the day, everything that you do, you're working hard unto the Lord, because that's what God has said to do in His Word. He said, with whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as for the Lord and not for man. So work hard because God commands us to. Work hard because the Bible also says provide for your family. And if you don't do that, you're worse than an unbeliever. Work hard because it talks about it all throughout Proverbs. And I don't just take my word for it. Read everything for yourself. Determine for yourself, because if all you do in life is go and you just pick up things from other people and you don't know why you actually believe that, it's a shallow thing. You're just going to end up, whenever it gets hard in life, you're going to throw those beliefs away, and then you're just going to fall back into the same old life that you're living right now, that you obviously don't like, and you want a change for a reason. So I don't want to ramble too much more. Get into your word, determine that your work matters, and put your vision on your goal and help people during the process. Give yourself a bigger reason to live than just for yourself. And guess what? You'll probably end up achieving everything that you want in life as a byproduct.